Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Reed's Rogue Review. It has been a while, but I am back. I have my new system set up and some under wonderful type. And of course, as I got into the second half of the semester of the school year, it is now time to actually go back to reviews. And I thought I'd kick it all off since we are about a week from Halloween, less than a week at the time of this recording, for our buddy the Hobgoblin. The Hobgoblin. Originally showed up in Amazing Spider-Man 238. This was March of 83. Yes, I had just turned 5 years old when this book came out. It was actually a mystery of who is the Hobgoblin. He was originally introduced to be somebody that a thief left a door in hand, which Spider-Man had actually let escape in the sewers, found the old Green Goblin, one of the outfits, because at this point town, Norman had been gone for close to 8 to 9 years as the Green Goblin, and Harry was still around, but he wasn't really much of a fixture anymore, and sold it to a mysterious buyer who at the end said, where the Green Goblin failed, the Hobgoblin will succeed. And it was quite the interesting. Originally, it wasn't actually found out until almost over a decade later that Roderick Kingsley was actually the Hobgoblin. He had actually used what was known as the Wrinkler device to alter memories for a lot of people. Ned Leeds was originally done. There's a lot of situation which actually led to the Hobgoblin's identity not being revealed by the original creators of this book, and I'll talk about that a little later. And speaking of which, who actually created this but none other than our buddy Roger Stern and John Romita Jr., which actually I will go back to when we talk about the legacy of the Hobgoblin here later today. But these guys are the ones who created, of course, the beginnings of the Hobgoblin, the designs and everything else. There were some past interviews that both Stern and Romita had talked about how they were kind of keeping some of the things from the Green Goblin, where it was more of a legacy villain based off that, but they wanted to make him sane but very sinister, instead of where Norman Osborn was more insane and sinister. So it was really kind of a cool little area what they came up to on their run. And Roger Stern's run as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man in the 80s was considered the really top end of this here in the post-Bronze Age of the comics and everything in the 80s and everything before he left the series too. So unique. He was quite unique. I mean, he was much more sinister. He was highly planning. Not that Norman Osborn is a Green Goblin, as we've seen in both the, reading back over the course of the series for the last 60 years. He was very, very cunning. He ran his own business. He had his brother Daniel disguise as himself to kind of keep things running. And basically, he kind of wanted to do a little bit more, which was control out of the underworld and do a lot of pieces and trying to make deals, knock out the Kingpin's fortune and things. So a little bit of what the Green Goblin originally had started as to when he tried to do the Enforcers and he tried to control a lot of the mob back in his original appearances before the memory gaps and, of course, leading up to his death in the 70s, his original death and everything. But it was quite a bit of what that on to the Hobgoblin. I mean, I remember him quite greatly because, like I said, I was 5. I was going to the old corner market store and I saw the original comic. Sadly, it got thrown out. Not by me. Just I had the first 5 issues of the Hobgoblin series that are no longer sadly around here, and they got thrown out in the trash, unfortunately, by by a family member who just didn't see the point and threw them all out. My uncle went through the same problem with them, but it was quite the story on here. And then, of course, he was supposedly revealed as Ned Leeds, Peter Parker's friend and partner. Betty Brant's husband was killed by the Foreigners' men and everything else, and then that kind of ended, and they later had him take over the legacy, which I'll talk about here in a second too, which is actually here. Main story is the original Shadows of the Past is probably considered one of the best. It is not only a great story, even though it went on for so long, it was so engaging. Everything with the Hobgoblin getting more pieces got clued about that before, Roger Stern left and Tom DeFalco and Rogers and Ron Friends had to take over the storyline. Like I said, there was a lot of issues that actually led to those problems of the Hobgoblin identity. And then, of course, having it being taken over by Jason Philip McIndale, who I'll talk about too in here too. But then of course, next story, of course, was years later when the Hobgoblin lives. Roger Stern came in with Ron Friends and just did an immaculate here, bringing back all the suspects, making feel like time had not done. It was a great engaged mystery to reveal that Roger Kingsley was the Hobgoblin, which later would be to Glenn Greenberg and, of course, Roger Stern would go on with Luke Ross to do the Goblins of the Gates, even though it was finally the original Hobgoblin versus the original Green Goblin. Of course, Norman never got into the costume. Even all these years later, they've had so many options. We have yet to actually have the Hobgoblin and the Green Goblin in costume actually battle, which I'll actually talk about a little bit in the animated series adaptation of the characters here, too. But these are actually considered the three main best Hobgoblin stories. Spider-Girl did an absolutely amazing job when Tom DeFalco had brought uh, Roderick back in Spider-Girl, and of course Ron Friends drawing it. Was a fantastic story arc there where he did a little bit of the past issues too, which I guess led to his end and death at the hands of Mayhem, and of course the end of the Magia Empire in Spider-Girl. Was a fantastic story, but it's quite interesting in how that is too. Roderick Kingsley, as he said, he was the Green Goblin without the insanity. You didn't even know he was a little insane himself too, but he really played the business angle a lot, even in the current storylines that are going on, which I'll talk about a little later. He has always kind of had that face of a businessman. He was a well-known fencer. He was a strategist. He was a ruthless business mogul. He has connections. I mean, later on, he went into, like you said, brainwashing and selling people different costumes, and basically went into kind of, the kingmaker of supervillains for quite a while. And he himself had paraded. He always manipulated everybody in ways that even Norman Osborn never did. He was always a great character. And when it was finally revealed that he was the Hobgoblin, everything kind of snapped and clicked. And he's been a very well loved character. Believe it or not, for a lot of modern readers, even though people know the Green Goblin through the cartoon and other things, the Hobgoblin was pretty much the largest generation of knowing this goblin and everything. It was adapted for the 90s series, which Mark Hamill did the voice, with a little bit of his Joker voice, with a little bit of his Sinister pieces. The only version is at that point in time, the writers did not know that Roderick Kingsley was going to be the revealed as a Hobgoblin, so they went with Jason Philip McIndale and it introduced him, which Mark Hamill also did his voice to introduce him as the Hobgoblin, but had actually set it up backwards. That Norman Osborn had set up the Hobgoblin first before he himself became the Green Goblin from the same accident from the things. It was kind of really cool, and we actually got the Goblin War where both the Hobgoblin and Green Goblin actually battled, which really was cool because Norman, knowing who the Hobgoblin really was, actually revealed him to his identity and stopped him, and actually showing how he was the number one Goblin. It was something we've been waiting for years. In the comics, we've gotten similar to where Jason McIndale fought Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin, but we never really got the original two to fight, though it is being set up in the current books. I do believe Joe Kelly wants this to happen, and I'll talk about that shortly. Legacy's been very good. Like I said, Jason Philip McIndale was done and introduced in everything else to replace him, which of course later did the Demo Goblin, which was a little bit of a weird storyline, was done, but it was the original Jack Lantern. John Romita Jr., believe it or not, returned in the 90s when they were updating during the Clone Saga when Ben Reilly took over as Spider-Man. Actually gave him the cybernetic enhancements, as you can see right here from the slide, is very still John Romita Jr. And thing, which made sense as he created the original design and everything else. But of course, as we know, Kingsley did kill him, officially gone. And even though he was brought back to life during the clone conspiracy by Dan Slott, he was pretty much left as a very torn character. And he actually had a lot of interesting things towards the end. He had a son he had custody battle, which was the reason why he turned to being a supervillain, trying to do the mercenary stuff that was kind of left over. And believe it or not, there's been talking about his family, but it's never really been brought into a thing. Of course, later on, there was also the piece of back when Big Time started by Dan Slott, where Fear Urich, the good Green Goblin, who was also supposed to originally be the fifth Green Goblin in Goblins of the Gate, but was never revealed and was a clone, but it was originally storyline that was supposed to happen, but got kind of stomped on because they said there were too many fans of Phil Urich, so we can't make him the villain. And of course, what did they do? They basically did that storyline where he took Kingsley's new setup pieces that he had disguised his brother Daniel with, and Phil, of course, killed Daniel and took on as the Hobgoblin. And of course, the costume has been adapted to the current version, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit too. And then, of course, there was the Peter David Robin Born of who was the daughter of Spider-Man 2211 as the Hobgoblin, who took on the pieces, merging the two between the Hobgoblin original thought process from Legend, and of course doing it with the Green Goblin, who is well known for that, especially during Peter David's runs of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man during Civil War. So there's been quite the legacy of the Hobgoblin in many forms, and the various people who have taken on the identity of the Hobgoblin has very good. So he has quite a sticking point where he is a goblin, but he is his own character, and despite the pieces on that, it has been worked worked for a lot of beats too. So my critiques on the character, believe it or not, I think the original piece with Roderick Kingsley, and I know a lot of writers, even the current writing of Joe Kelly, has been trying to keep more of who Roderick Kingsley is. I honestly see outside Roger Stern, Tom DeFalco and Peter David have really, really jumped on exactly who the Hobgoblin is, and other writers have really done that too. I honestly like the original story about who the Hobgoblin is, the pieces they are, how he started taking the legacy. He did get his butt kicked the first time with Spider-Man because he was not experienced enough. Eventually, getting the things done to get the Goblin formula without the insanity, even though it's been kind of revealed some of the insanity has been put on him and a lot of the pieces. Cons wise, I think unfortunately he got too popular too fast. There were a lot of political things on the behind in the writer sense, which actually led to Roger Stern leaving and not finish the storyline, taking over a decade. And even though there were talks and things too about back when Christopher Priest was editor in Spider-Man, which actually led to Ned Leeds being taken. And I am not quoting the pieces because you can Google it, very search, because it's been talked about a lot. I think that really kind of started making the Hobgoblin generic, even though they were two different characters. And it did gun, that's me when I got back in comics in the 90s, I was a little confused who was who between the Green Goblin and the Hobgoblin because of so many years not reading comic books. It took me quite a while until Hobgoblin Lives to really get back into who the character was. And even though I don't have the original issues, and if I go try to find them now, they're about $200 to $500 to get that original storyline. Sorry, folks, I don't have the money. I'm not that big of a collector, but I've also feel like they've put some interesting things, even the modern one, when they tried Phil Urich, since that was originally the idea behind Goblins of the Gate back during the Spider-Man, the End series in the final chapter and chapter one, back when John Byrne and Howard Mackie were on the series, but it just never worked. And I feel like they really kind of eventually just kind of ruined the characters of Phil Urich, as well as the fact that Jason McIndale had a lot of originals. We understood why he was finally killed off, but there was a lot of his backstory that, even though in Clone Conspiracy touched on it, they never really got into it. And that's kind of how that, but I have always loved the character of Roger Kingsley. And I do like with the current things they are doing in the current Amazing Spider-Man, they've really gotten him a piece on. They've kind of given a more unique look to him. I know it's borrowing things from the Big Time and Phil Urich outfit with the detachable wings, but I think the flaming sword and some of the other way he strategized, the fact that they're using Roderick's, lawyers and red tape to keep himself out of jail, as well as do some sinister stuff. And the mystery right now is really kind of cool of what is he really planning? What is he trying to do with the money? And why is he working with the cult of the Goblin, aka the cult of the Scryers right now? It's really kind of a cool storyline. And it still keeps me enjoying the current story arc because I think this is the best Roger Kingsley has been written in a very long time. And he still uses other hired villains, which became a story staple during Dan Slott's run on Amazing Spider-Man, being the pieces such as Itsy Bitsy, as well as other things he's done with some of the other supervillains. It kind of keeps it from being hush, but it still works as a storyline. So honestly, I think this is probably the best we've seen use of the Hobgoblin. Yes, we can do the thing. I mean, I've never been a big fan of the mobile wings. I do kind of like some of the effects, but give me the glider and day of the week, and I'd be a happy guy. If we get into that, I think we can work. But I think that is honestly good. I actually do like where the Hobgoblin currently is, where the story arc is going, and I'm hoping that will continue. And with that, everybody, I am done. I want to thank everybody who has been on here. Thank for everybody offline who has supported me these last couple months. I had to take a step back from a lot of my reviews from both the main books as well as Reed's Rogues review. I thank everybody for the time. I am now coming back to these reviews starting in November. Both for I have something really cool planned here for one of these Rogues reviews on a very unknown villain that actually has a little personal spot in my heart on it for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to get into that story arc in a little while. Especially because there is supposedly going to be a little talk about that villain in the current books. I'm going to throw my little sinister laugh out there. Yes, folks. Yes. Anyhow, thank you so much. If you like what you've seen here, please like and subscribe, guys. It helps the algorithm. Watching the whole way through works really well. Please check us on the SpidermanCrawlspace.com for all your current news, all the amazing reviews. To everybody who has been picking up the pieces for the reviews for the main books and the bad guys, thank you, guys. It has been a really rough couple of months. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back. And here is to the rest. And on that note, everybody, I'll talk to everybody later on the crawl space.